everybody. Welcome to this workshop on inspiration. I think we're ready to be inspired. And I'd love to welcome our panelists here, Dara, Karen, Melanie, and Betsy, and all the lovely ladies here in the audience. So without taking much time, I'll hand it over to Dara. Dara, over to you.
Hello everyone. So nice to see everyone today. Thank you so much for coming and kind of being with us as we think about a really important topic. I'm so happy to have met some of the other panelists and to be all speaking together today on something that is really important to me and I think obviously to all of us, which is mental well-being. It's such an important topic and one that we don't really openly discuss enough. So I just want to start out, when you think about your work or your workplace, raise your hand if you've ever sort of felt just really tired and exhausted, just like physically tired. Okay, raise your hand. Raise your hand if you've ever felt kind of cynical, like, oh, the work I do just doesn't make a difference, and why am I here? Like, what am I doing? It's not making any difference. Raise your hand if you felt. Okay, so a few too. And then finally, raise your hand if you've ever felt like you just weren't doing as good a job as you used to. Maybe because you were tired or just somehow feeling like, oh, you're not able to do your best. Okay, so a lot of folks. So the bad news, well, those are the markers of workplace burnout. So burnout is an actual disorder, something defined by the World Health Organization as a workplace disorder where you experience chronic workplace stress. And especially during the pandemic, that's skyrocketed, and as you can imagine, it's become a big issue, which is why I've been asked to speak here today and have spoken on this a lot before, just because unfortunately it's a very, very, very common thing. So a few more questions for you. Maybe raise your hand if you felt this way because you felt like things were unfair in the workplace. Like something was unfair, okay. Maybe because your values didn't line up with your organization. Couple there as well, okay. So these are some of the reasons why we experience burnout. And what I like to think and talk about as an organizational consultant is, what's the relationship between what we can do as individuals to protect and promote our well-being, and what is the responsibility of the organization? So a lot of times, we spend the majority, I think, of our life at work. We spend a lot of time doing what we do, and not all organizations are as supportive as others, right? And some organizations have really taken steps to promote and support well-being for their employees, and others kind of go through the motions. I think we all know when we're in a place or in a job where we feel supported, where we feel like people really care about us. And so what I like to think and talk, and I'm here to answer your questions about, is how do we kind of find the best fit or the best place where we feel like we're able to live our best lives, we're able to really be authentic, be ourselves, where the workplace supports us in our well-being as well. And we definitely have personal responsibility there, but there's a lot that organizations can do to support as well. Because we're in this together, right? That we spend a lot of time at work, and organizations do care about our well-being, if only because a happy employee is also a more productive and better one for the bottom line. Sadly, we shouldn't only have to promote that to businesses for them to care about us, but that is also kind of one of the selling points, is that the more that people take care of their employees, kind of the better we are, the longer we stay. And there's talk right now of the Great Resignation, which there's some conflicting data on. So anyway, I'm very happy to be here with everyone. I'm happy to hear the other panelists in a minute, and looking forward to further discussions. Thank you all.
That's very insightful introduction to the whole thing. So over to you, Kenneth.
Okay, the music stopped, the audience was clapping, many of them on their feet. I was on my hands and knees on the ice, overcome with emotion. And that was just 8 months ago at the 2022 U.S. National Championships. After my performance that weekend, I was named to the Winter Olympic team. It should have been the happiest moment of my life, but I vividly remember telling my mom that, why do I not feel happy or excited? I'm a two-time Olympian. Immediately, my focus shifted off of what I was feeling because I didn't think that it mattered. What did matter was my training regimen so I could be in the perfect shape at the Olympics. I've spent 18 years of my life figure skating. What started as something full of joy and endless laughs shifted to something that was kind of miserable. My figure skating career is best described as a scary roller coaster ride. You never know what to expect, and that is because of two things. One, because I struggled with performance consistency, and two, because of the intense physical and mental ups and downs. The highs are so incredible, from that relief of my fist pumping through the air when I know I have skated my absolute best, from standing on the top of the podium at the U.S. National Championships, and knowing that I would be representing Team USA at the Olympics. But I can name even more examples of the times I was dissatisfied and downright scared. I will never forget the stab in my heart after a rough performance, that feeling of failure, not just as an athlete, but as a student and a daughter of immigrant parents. I dangerously tied my athletic achievements directly with my self-worth. So I was stuck in this never-ending struggle of believing and truly believing that I was just never ever good enough. Looking back, I realized why I wasn't crying tears of joy and jumping up and down the moment I was named to the Olympic team. And it was because I unconsciously believed that that was the bare minimum, and it was expected of me to do so. Anything below that standard was just not acceptable. So if I set a goal and I didn't achieve it, I would beat myself up over it. I fought with my parents, and something any good Asian kid knows that you really shouldn't do, since they sacrificed everything for me, and skating is a very expensive sport. So in my mind, if I wasn't successful, I wasted their precious time and money. And it was virtually impossible for me to not feel my mom's unconditional support, because she made all my dresses when I competed, so I truly felt all of that support. And I even wore at the Olympics, so it was very special for me. And I will say my Olympic story didn't have the happy ending I was seeking. I had the performance of a lifetime in the team event, which helped us secure silver, but I faltered in my individual event. And truly, it's something that's very challenging for me to talk about without having flashbacks of the Olympics and all the tears that I shed while I was there in Beijing. But I know that talking about it is a huge part of this healing process and prioritizing my mental health. Even though I had access to a sports psychologist, I found what worked best for me was opening up to other athletes and chatting about our struggles together. By gaining perspective from them, I was able to have confidence to tackle my own issues. I remember seeing Simone Biles open up about her mental struggles, and prioritizing her struggles over the Olympic medal was just mind-blowing for me to watch. And to see Naomi Osaka open up about her negative self-talk made me feel less alone. Sharing is very hard, and my instinct is to bottle it up and keep it all to myself. I found that it's not the healthiest way to cope, so I started journaling quite a bit. There were no limitations. I just would put my frustrations onto paper, but I would force myself kind of to end on a positive note, because I realized that it was not healthy to keep it all in my mind. Eventually, I expanded my audience to other people in my life versus just my journal, because I realized that I'm not doing this alone. And since figure skating is such a lonely sport, I can feel like it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying for me. And many of these times I let fear scare me, but even more times I fought back. I may have not succeeded each time, but that courage to not let fear win. Oh, I need to stop. I'm so sorry, I had it written down and I thought it was under 5 minutes, so I was trying really hard. But I guess can I kind of wrap it up? Sorry. I think I just want to end with, I am still on this journey right now, and I'm exercising everything I've learned through my mental health journey. I wrote everything on paper, clearly. I'm sharing it with you all, and I hope that it can inspire someone in this room to do the same.
I love your story, Karen. Thanks so much. I'm so sorry to kind of stop the time here, trying to pass it on. But over to you, Nilani. I'm not going to take much time.
I'm actually going to come over here. I was sitting and talking.
Yes.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here. So I'm here to talk to you about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. The inability to believe that your success is not deserved. This impacts an estimated, it's a very large range, 9 to 80% of people. And mostly it's women too. It's when you think to yourself, I'm not good enough. No one's figured out I'm fraud yet. I don't belong here. If this resonates with you, you're in good company. These are just some of the famous people that we know have admitted to experiencing imposter syndrome. Lady Gaga, Emma Watson, Tina Fey, Maya Angelou. Yeah, it's remarkable. These are people who we thought are the most incredible people. They feel it too. They feel what we feel. So, you're not alone. Look at these percentages. 70% of successful people experience it. 75% of executive women. 80% of CEOs. These are the people making the big decisions. And 84% of entrepreneurs and small business owners. You are not alone. You are in great company. What are the signs? These are the signs. I'll let you read them. They're awful. Right? Anxiety, lack of self-confidence, depression. It starts impacting our work performance, our career advancements, and it starts to cause physical and mental problems. So I want to focus most of my time on this. So this is the Lokahi Wheel. It was developed by Kandy schools from a Native Hawaiian perspective, and I would go off to even branch out for a Pacific Islander perspective. Mental health is viewed holistically, encompassing body, mind, and spirit, and it's embedded in family, land, and the spiritual world. There are 6 dimensions of this wheel. Many of you are probably already familiar with it. You've seen it before. You might have studied it in school. I want to talk to you about how each one of these will help us when we encounter imposter syndrome, because we will. Over and over again, it will happen. Na'au. Where's my na'au? Na'au's right here. Become aware of your feelings. Recognize these thoughts are happening. That's the first step. Ohana. Talk to people you trust. You said it yourself. Talking to people you trusted, your peers. Yeah? For some people, that might be a therapist. That might be their family. It might be their community. It might be their peers. Talk about it. Ask for help. Remember, you're not the only one. Mana'o. Reflect on your needs, your limitations. List the things you can and cannot control. Let's be realistic. And challenge those negative thoughts that keep coming up. Your thoughts are not facts. Just because you think it doesn't mean it's true. Hino. Nourish yourself with food from the Aina. Move your body. I don't like exercising, I'll admit it to you. I don't. But I love to dance, I love to swim, I love to be in the water. Move your body, feel the strength of your kino. Piliuhane. Connect with your spirituality. Whatever the activities that are sacred to you, whether it's prayer, meditation, acts of service, gratitude, even nature. Take a moment to breathe. Feel the wind, walk on the grass, walk on the sand, listen to the birds, go in the water, be held by the ocean. How lucky are we here in Hawaii? Feel the warmth of the sun. And last is kuleana. Remember, we are not alone. When we take care of ourselves, when we recognize the imposter syndrome, the thoughts that are coming up, when we start doing our holistic wellness practices, it honors the long line of ancestors that came here before us. The reason we are here standing, sitting together. And it also helps the future generations. The ladies here in front of me, even the future generations for yourself. The future generations will struggle. That's inevitable. Like it's going to happen. However, practicing this, you'll be able to guide them and share your wisdom with them. Thank you.
And over to you, Kandy.
Good afternoon. Is it afternoon?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Okay. Hi, my name is Dr. Courtney Tracy. I am a licensed clinical social worker and a doctor of clinical psychology. When I was asked to come to this panel called Hysterical Women, I could not help but say yes, and you'll soon learn why. First, I want to talk about the definition of the word hysteria. Hysteria was coined by Hippocrates, a Greek physician in the 5th century BC. What did it mean? It was a diagnosis only given to women, and it meant that they were emotionally uncontrollable, unstable, incapable of functioning in society and in their families. And why did they think that happened? Because our wombs wandered all around our bodies and made us extremely emotional. So what was the solution? Well, we needed to sleep with our husbands more. I wonder who came up with that. Now, over time, the term hysteria became known to actually be a mental health condition and not a uterine condition, but it was still not removed from the DSM, and the stigma wasn't removed either until the 1950s. The DSM, for those of you who don't know, is the clinician's Bible for diagnosis. Next slide, please. In today's world, we have more of a modern term for hysteria, borderline personality disorder. It was added to the clinician's Bible in the 1980s. Recently in the United States, one of the biggest Hollywood trials took place, the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. As a public figure, the day that Amber Heard was suggested to have borderline personality disorder, my DMs were flooded. They were flooded because I, too, have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and I am a very outspoken advocate for what it actually means. The issue is today we have the internet and social media dictating what our diagnoses mean. So if we look on the internet for personality disorder and Amber Heard, we get memes like we should close the case because she must be a psycho. That's the problem. The woman is a psycho. And what's the solution according to the internet? That Amber and her baby should not be alive. That's the kind of comments that we see as females that have mental health issues are not on the internet and on social media today. So what did I do? I decided to go live on YouTube and share to almost 100,000 people my diagnosis and discuss every symptom and discuss it from a subjective standpoint. What does it feel like for me? Not what do you think it feels like for you. We need to show up on the internet. We need to show up as women on social media because that's where our youth and our young adults are. We have to share our truth online. And it's not just females with mental health issues, it's also women's place in society and in culture. And we can see, for example, at least in Western societies, Muslim women, according to Dina Tokyo, can appear to be oppressed, subjugated, and the other. But Dina decided to come onto YouTube and become the center of the conversation. That this isn't a monolith either. This is not a type of person. Every human being is individual. And she made a documentary, #YourAverageMuslim, that was viewed by 300,000 people. My favorite part of her documentary, how long are we going to be seen as breaking stereotype for Muslim women or any woman? We aren't doing these things to break the stereotype. We're just living our lives. And that's what we are all doing here today as women. In the US, 45% of teens 13 to 17 use the internet almost all of the time, probably just not accounting for when they're sleeping or in the shower. And 97% of teens have a social media platform. It's why I show up on there. It's why I sold the business I founded. Because instead of working with hundreds of people, I could change 2 million or more every day. So, as we continue to know that social media is far more productive than mass media these days and small micro conversations, the macro ones are important too. So when you're ready, start with baby steps. The internet's a very scary place. Test your fear line. This is the way I describe finding your window of tolerance. Your tolerance is what can your nervous system handle and what can it not. Test that. Don't overstep. You are important. And know the space. It'll happen. If you're getting negative comments, you're reaching the right people. And finally, self-care. Take breaks. Activism tools the nervous system, but not as much as misogyny does. Thank you.
Wow, what an amazing panel. I think we've heard bits of all these different topics, and I'm sure you're dying to ask some questions out there. So I'm going to open the floor up to you. If you have any questions, we've got our lovely panelists who have to answer, I think.
I actually have questions for you. I'm interested in your bio. It sounds like you've done a lot of work for the girls in Sri Lanka and women in Sri Lanka. I'm curious, how it's been lately with everything going on for you and your work.
Oh, wow. I wasn't expecting that. But yeah, I think the news has pretty much spoken a lot about what's going on in Sri Lanka, and things have been quite chaotic. But I'm happy to have a chat with you maybe offline and explain a little more about it. And yeah, sure, please fire on, and I'll definitely answer your questions for you. Thanks so much.
I have a question. So I guess to anybody. I have a teenage daughter, and I think as parents, we always struggle with, we protect them from the internet and social media, and just limit their time, and stop them as some parents recommend, or just kind of give them the freedom to explore on social media. I just kind of want to get your thoughts on that.
Would you like to answer that?
That's a really good question. I mean, there's truly, I believe at this point, no way to avoid teenagers being online. It starts to exclude them from the society in general and their peers. I think the more important thing is building a relationship with them where if social media starts to affect them, they'll tell you. And one way that you do that is by bringing up when things affect you. I feel like that's a really good suggestion. Like, I was out with my friends and this person said this thing. This is how I handled it. So you're not really talking about your problems, but you're talking about a problem and a solution. And then maybe come to you and say, you know, someone said this to me online, this is how it made me feel. I think mirroring is really helpful. And also just open discussions about what they can see. It depends on the age of the child, of course. But open discussions of what they might see. And then, you know, you can't block the world, but we can block how the world affects them. And that's really important.
Thank you, Dr. Kandy. Is there anyone else who'd like to answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with what Courtney was saying. Being able to have that open line of communication, as open as you can get it, teenager, right? And maybe having a social media presence yourself so you can kind of see what's on there. Sometimes it's not as bad as we think, and sometimes it's really, really bad, but at least you have that first-hand knowledge of seeing what's happening, you experiencing it, you have your thoughts about it, and then having that conversation with them, not in any kind of like judgmental way, but more of, hey, I saw this is what I think, what do you think? Because then you're asking them for their opinion. You're bringing them in. They can be your teacher in a way. And then you're not going against each other. You're not above them, but you're at an equal kind of level, navigating the social media.
Something else I want to say too. If they will let you, depending on how old they are, you can create sort of a safety net on the back end of their profile. So you can block out offensive words. So you can block out P-word or fat or annoying or anything that would show up in their comments that would really affect their mental health, and tell them, right? We don't want to blanket them without giving them autonomy, but that can be really helpful too. And teenagers' minds move on to the next thing really quickly, so it's unlikely that they're going to go back in and remove those. I don't really see the point. But that's a nice way to provide a safety net, and also really teaching them the aspects of social media that the platforms provide, like mute, unfollow, block, report, not interested, and get them used to using those, because it goes so miss with social media. Social media platforms put them in there so that they don't have to have accountability. They don't really give a step-by-step process to teach people that are new to social media how to actually utilize it in a healthy way.
I can always come back. I just love this topic, and I really enjoyed your presentation, Courtney. Just because I'm a person actually who I'm totally off social media, except for I have a LinkedIn open just because I feel like I have to. And some of your points were really interesting around, that it is a place to have impact, and especially for our younger generation. I'm pregnant now, so I am thinking about what it will be like for my child in the future. And honestly, I get scared, because I am a person who took myself off intentionally because it's not good for me personally. And I loved Karen, just like the awareness of thinking about your own well-being. Leilani thinking about the imposter syndrome and that how women in general, it's just a major thing that we all struggle with. And it's always, I think, so as I've been listening to you all, thinking about my intro around, being in the workplace and what effect that has, et cetera, but really about our own personal agency in the choices that we make. I think we're here because we are thinking about how do we make an impact, what are the ways that we want to show up and be meaningful in the world. And at the same time, it's a scary world, a difficult world, and it's one in which we have to make personal choices about how do we take care of ourselves, how do we take care of others, and so I don't think I have any clear answers, especially for social media and the youth and future child. But I think my reactions to it, you guys are saying, it just makes me think a lot about how important it is that we know ourselves first and that we know our own comfort levels. And I think, Courtney, that was one of your main points, was we have to know your own tolerance, and some of our tolerances may be different than others. So I think probably the the thought there is like to know the child too, and to know, you know, what their tolerance level is. Especially as I think it took a long time for me to figure out mine, because I think it, you know, it's not something that we often know even or are aware of ourselves.
Thanks, Dana. Yeah, I think I saw a lot of heads nodding, and I think for those of us who have children, daughters, I think they're thinking about it as well. So, yeah, really good, real answers, real questions.
I have a question. Thank you, doctors. And I'm so grateful for this conversation. Similar to the social media, I like to blame Dana. I got off 2 years ago, and I feel more present. And I've since, you know, rejoined for a little bit for a business group here and there. And I've been, you know, oh shoot, you know, what is my nervous system tolerance? So I deal with that on a personal basis, and I'm like, oh, how is everything being marketed, and how are businesses growing? So I don't want to, like, you know, put my head in the sand. But to switch a little bit, because I'm reading this piece around hysteria underneath, and it's like how pharmaceuticals have been pushed, and, you know, the psycho woman, the hysterical woman, and I feel for the children. I work with women with digestive stress as well as young adults growing and caring about how we consume and how we think and feel, right? And so one client in particularly, her daughter is 14, and she wants the autonomy while at the doctor, because now the young girl is going to the doctor, and the doctor is pushing birth control and this pill and that pill, and so this, you know, 15, 16-year-olds are on how many kinds of meds with various side effects and, you know, and things. So I'd love to ask, how are you empowering these mothers and young adults to ask questions and stand up for themselves? Because I know that I have had to really stand up in a doctor's office to take care of my rights, so that I wasn't just given some random generic drug that may or may not work.
To answer this?
And you were just like,
I feel grateful to be in a room where we can talk about this kind of thing, because it's.
and that's probably part of the answer, is just having that open space to have that dialogue of not only how do we empower other people, but how are we doing it for ourselves? Yeah. I was taking notes. I remember one thing that the person said, one of the speakers, a keynote speaker said, you know, you can be polite and still be like raised, still be bold, still have that fire. And I think that might be part of it, is doing that for ourselves and then showing that to other people. And what I've noticed with some of the young people that I work with is sometimes they don't have the question in the first place. They don't, or they're not aware of what might happen, but they'll tell you about it afterwards. And so maybe having those preemptive conversations, because we wait for the experience to happen and then we reflect on it. When we're able to also kind of acknowledge, hey, you're going to go into your first week. What's that going to be like? Let's talk about that. It's pretty like invasive. And what are all these other options, and how do we feel about it? And that's really, you know, between the parent and also the young lady and her body, and then figuring that out and having her life to really figure out, well, what do I want? What don't I want? And it's okay when I change my mind. I don't have to pick one thing and stick to it. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. I have so much to say. I didn't want to go first, and I don't think I'll remember all of it. So the first thing is I created a charity in my hometown called Your Unconscious is Showing, and we're kicking off this fall. And what we're doing is going to high schools and colleges, and we're teaching young adults and kids how their unconscious works. Not subconscious, unconscious. Not only how the psychology works in our minds, but also how our unconscious bodies work. Like, we're not conscious of what our body is doing. We can think about it, but like, we can't control our immune system right now consciously. It'd be cool if we could, but we can't. So your unconscious is showing, and everything that you do, how does your body work, how does your brain work, how does your mind work. So psychoeducation is so important. You said they don't have the questions. We need to give them the questions. And that comes with explaining to them, one, what the questions are, two, why they're important, and three, the type of answers that they can expect, which ones are BS, and which ones are okay to be earned. Second thing is it's really important that we advocate for diversity, even in professions and educations and homes, because if a teen is sitting in front of a psychiatrist or a doctor and that professional is telling them something's wrong with you, they need to have examples that no, there isn't. And there are alternative options. So on my podcast, I don't even remember what it's called, Human First, I bring on therapists and I interview them as humans with depression, with postpartum issues, with infertility, with PTSD, so that my listeners, who are usually young women, understand that there's flexibility. You can have careers, you can be successful. You don't necessarily have to be on medication. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. You know, my advice for medication, I'm on medication right now. I just started medication a month ago. And I need it. I tried holistic advances for as long as I could, and my life was unmanageable. So I got on medication. The goal is decrease the medication as you increase the coping skills. If you can, make it not a lifelong external support and know what you're putting in your body. And I don't remember the third thing.
Really helpful insight. Alan, back to more questions.
I have a question for Karen. Your story was so great, and it's so hard, I think, for those of us who've never been at that elite level of athletics to really imagine all the psychology that's around that level of performance. So I had two questions, and one is going to be more generic for everybody, but after 16, 18 years of being at that level, and obviously having so much drive, I would be curious if your drive came from you or your parents or where you felt like it came from to be able to do that. But what do you do after? So you get to such an elite level in your sport, and then it's your whole life. And then what is it like to, maybe not have that in the future? And then secondly, going back to parent questions, what would you recommend to parents about how much to push your children in these kinds of things? Like, how hard do you push them versus, sort of coming back, and what would you give as guidance? And that can be there.
Great questions. I think, skating is definitely my entire life. I've done it for 18 years, and I'm actually kind of on that process right now. I've gone to do Olympics, and I'm thinking that I don't know if I want to sacrifice more for the sport. I still love skating so much, and looking back, I would still make all those sacrifices that I did, and happily take sacrifices my parents made for me. But I'm kind of on this process right now, on this journey of figuring out what else is there in life and what other opportunities there are that aren't figure skating related. What I have in the future, I'm for sure going to Cornell University. I have 3 more years of school left as an undergrad, so that's my only obligation right now. Everything else, I'm just kind of in this free space of just doing what I feel happy doing. Not that I wasn't happy when I was skating, it was just a lot to take in. And growing up, a lot of the drive came from me. I remember my mom telling me, just step away. You're kind of miserable, you're crying a lot, like, stop. And I think because I was very kind of like rebellious and stubborn, I'm like, no, I need to do it. So I kept going and I stuck it out. But I think that was just me. I know there's a lot of different situations with different figure skaters that I've talked to. But for me, most of the drive was just internal. I just felt like I needed to just keep plugging along in this sport and see where it takes me. I'm definitely in this place where I don't know. I'm not sure retirement is potentially on the table, but I'm also not ready to just be like, oh, I'm for sure done with this sport. I'm still figuring it out right now. I'm still on this journey. Thank you for your question.
Well, speaking of, young women in sports, I grew up, also a Title IX recipient. I feel so grateful. And, what's happening with these young ladies that are, how sports, getting so much more recognition, but it's also driving perfectionism. And if I don't, all or nothing thinking. And, with suicides happening more and more with these young women that are being exposed, it's like, how might we support women in sports with opportunity? And what's possible for them.
How to deal with all the haters, right?
I guess back to the whole social media thing. I had a lot of experience with social media growing up as I kind of became more of a public figure in figure skating. And there's just a lot of pros and cons. I will say for sure, before competitions, I delete all my social media apps. I just feel like I tried it. I tried to stay on those apps before competition, and I just couldn't do it. So I have to delete it and just focus on competing, especially like the week leading into a competition. And that's just through kind of from experimenting and figuring out what works for me. Clearly what works for me may not work for everybody else, but I've definitely just been able to kind of test the waters and see what I feel like I thrive under. Thank you.
I think that that's a good question, and also I think that the answer I could provide would also answer the second question that you had as well. When do we push our kids? I think the question also asks when do we push ourselves, when do we push our friends? And I think the first thing to ask yourself is, what am I using to push the person? Am I using what I want for them? Am I using what I think society wants for them? Or what their parents want for them? Or am I asking them? How much pressure do you want? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? When do you want me to push you if you're not doing well? I think often we try to ask how we help other people in general, but every person is different. So you just ask them. Because as they get older, let's say we're talking about teenagers, as they get older, they're going to remember that you gave them free will and that you gave them autonomy. And if they beat themselves up over the choices that they made when they're younger, you're there to help them through that, not shield them from it or push them in a way where maybe they don't talk to you about anything in the future. So it's very individualized, and it really depends on each child. And of course, statistics could tell us this works and this doesn't, but you don't know where your kid lies in that statistic until you talk to them.
And your question was a little around perfectionism too, right? And can you say it again? Actually, I know there was a lot there.
Oh yeah, this, how opportunity and success, for these young women that maybe, for instance, I played softball growing up. Now this summer, watching softball on NCAA, I'm like, wow, look at these women go, it's so exciting. And I can imagine it increases pressure and stress. And I know my perfectionism that I have to get to deal with. And I'm curious how we might support the younger generation in going after what they want with it being okay. It's somewhat around it. Not being perfect all the time, to be ordinary. I don't have to be the best of the best all the time. I'm like, I'm doing that in my 40s.
Oh, no, I love the question. I love the thoughts around perfectionism, and I can see where it just really tied into the last question around how much of things come from our own drive and our own kind of will, and how much do we, are we able to support our children, to appropriately encourage them, to ask them, how much pressure, or just and to be aware, to really watch and be aware of them. And I think again, I think that it starts with being aware of ourselves too, and that's where so much of all of this work, even around and all the discussions around mental health, I think come down to our own ability to sit with ourselves and to sit with our own emotions and thoughts and to be honest with them and to be vulnerable with them. And I think in some, in a lot of respects, like Courtney, what you're doing with social media and sharing your struggle is incredibly brave, and in a way that it's to share ourselves with other people truly is such an incredible thing, because it doesn't often happen, right? And the thing about being that way in the workplace, some of the things that I've looked at into the past is like our ability to be psychologically safe, to actually be ourselves, to feel like we can express ourselves truly where we are. And I think about this in the workplace just because that's the work I do. But I think this happens everywhere in all of our relationships, is how can we, and it starts with ourselves, right? Like knowing ourselves, and it's such a struggle, I think. As you said, Terry, you're still working on it. I'm 39, still working on it. And it takes a long time to have that honest ability to look at yourselves, your own strengths and weaknesses, to know when you need help, to reach out for help. Leilani and I were talking about the shortage of mental health providers right now, and how difficult, even when you know you need help, it's hard to get help. So I think part of even your last question, Tara, around discussions of medication, it's normalizing having discussions where you are actually able to be vulnerable and to think about what you need, and to have these discussions with yourself and with others. And the vulnerability piece is something that I think is tough, takes courage, and because we live in society, I think we've been talking a lot about social media today, it's not always easy, because you get opened up to bullying, to negative comments, to things that you just don't want to see. So it takes a lot of insight, I think, to operate in this world, basically.
Yes, please.
I have a question to anyone about corporate work culture. I think I've been really lucky in that I have worked for small businesses where my bosses are so kind and gracious, and I need to take a day to just be in a fetal position. They're super understanding about it. Do you have any advice on how we can advocate for ourselves and colleagues in a situation that's probably in a more corporate setting where they might need to take, or we might need to take a mental health day? Any advice?
No, I think we were about to say something before. I'm sure time.
Oh, I was going to answer her question, but I can do that.
One, that's awesome that you're working in a place where you feel supported and that you can do that. Very complicated question, only because I honestly think it's very difficult to find organizations and to be in the right place that you're supported. A lot of research goes down to the idea of having even just one good friend at work. Helps a lot, just someone you can honestly share and it goes to the authenticity and the ability to kind of speak piece, and to feel truly supported and safe. And a lot of other research goes around the relationship with your manager. So your boss, I'm guessing in this case your boss is pretty great and you can tell them when you need to take a day off. Not everyone has that. I think that is part of the biggest challenge, and this is where at a recent conference I was speaking at, when asked about this, I said, I think ultimately there's a lot of things we can do around manager trainings and such, but it's finding that right fit with the person who is going to supervise your time, because ultimately they are going to dictate a lot of what you do and your ability to take a day off or not, and set the tone for your team, right? And also model the behaviors that you want. So if you want to be in a place where you're supported for your health and well-being, and look at what your boss is doing and look at how they model their life, because I think that's a pretty important indicator of what they'll support for you. And then as far as what you can do for your colleagues, I think it's just being as open and honest as you can about and making friends, being a true person. That's the best I think we can do. So thank you for that question, but I have so many more thoughts.
Absolutely that question. I just want to add, for anybody who may get a different job in the future, please interview your job. Don't just have them interview you. So just go online, look up questions you should, and not the questions that you should ask to get the job, right? The questions that you should ask for your mental well-being. Because then you may find yourself stuck in a place, which is probably part of the question, like, I can't quit. I don't have that privilege. I'm making a good amount financially, but I'm not making a good amount mentally or psychologically. Know the questions, and that's a great question, because maybe the interviewer might not be your supervisor. Who's going to be supervising me? Look that person up on the internet. I mean, they might not be on it like data, but you can try. But that's really important. I think we try to push ourselves into environments because we think we can build our way up and create the career that we want, but then we're only thinking in terms of vocation. We're not thinking about the other areas of our well-being. So take a look at all those areas, think about what you want in a job, and then go ask if that job has that. And if it doesn't, bye. It's helpful.
And to add on that, one thing that I've noticed with employers is, although they should know what they should and should not provide, sometimes that's not communicated with us as the employee. And so knowing your rights as an employee of the organization, knowing what are the rights that I have for taking mental health days or sick days, or extended sick leave, or medical leave, how do I access that? Asking the right questions, doing your research, and knowing what your rights are. And sometimes you might be the one educating your manager. HR will know, for sure, but that's not always communicated with the manager that we have. So advocating for yourself very strongly.
I think what we are seeing here and what's happening is something that very rarely happens. Professionals being real with us. And I think we're getting real hardcore answers. And sadly, as much as I'd love to go on, we're coming to an end. We've got a few minutes more before our coffee break, so maybe we can have one more question from anyone. Yes.
What first? Yeah, and you just touched on it, which is for the professionals on the panel, and Karen, I'll ask you my question separately. I would love to know what it was that inspired or motivated you to get into this field.
Full disclosure, I was inspired to go into this field because I don't really chop chocolate, honestly. And I had wished there had been someone there for me. And so I wanted to be able to be that person for someone else, to help them through the challenges of having a difficult family relationship and not knowing how to navigate that. And I live in North Carolina. There's not a lot of people that look like me and that understand my cultures. So that's what inspired me to go into the field that I work in.
We're happy with you. I got into the field because I feel like I grew up in the pages of the DSM. Remember that clinician's Bible? I had a grandparent with alcoholism, I had a grandma with codependency, I had a mom with depression, I had a brother with an eating disorder, and I had an uncle with neurodevelopmental disorder, and we all lived together. So, one, I feel like I didn't have a choice if I truly wanted to be able to keep all of my feet on the ground. I had to learn about what was going on. And then I realized that I started getting better after learning that. And the majority of the mental health profession, at least when you're sitting with somebody else in the room, is educating them on the things that they may not have learned about themselves growing up. And so I figured if this field answered these questions for me and made me feel less alone, then I'd like to enter this field and make somebody else feel that too.
I love how all of our reasons are very personal, because in being in this type of field, I think Yeah, of course they are, right? Of course they're really, really tied to why we're here. I was similarly, I mean, I think our families, the people around us, my mom had cancer when I was in college and struggled with it for about 10 years. And it was very difficult when you're physically unwell to be mentally well. And so she was like pretty dysphoric or kind of like mild depressed. And I watched and I kind of was just like always like, why can't she be happy? You know, like what? And so I was majoring in economics, but I switched into, or I did my master's first in positive psychology and then kind of went on to more psychology, but really about how do we live our best life, because I just looked at my mom and maybe was judgmental at the time because, you know, she had been struggling for being sick for so long, and I was like, I wish she could just get better. I wish she could just be happy. You know, like why can't she appreciate what she still has with my dad or whatever? And I think it's, you know, taking more time to realize how much, you know, our mind and body are connected and how much our physical well-being impacts our mental well-being, how much, you know, how complicated that is, you know, and so I got interested in how do we, you know, kind of be our best selves, live our best lives. And I think the work I do specifically with organizations is because I've had terrible jobs too. And so okay, you know, and now I work with organizations. But I think I started to think about how much our work and what we do impacts our well-being, just because it's where we spend a lot of our time. So, but the primary driver is always how do we live our best life? How do we be happy? And I think at the end of the day, you know, that's what I've been like on a journey to continue figuring out too for myself.
So, on behalf of everybody here, I'd like to thank Dana, Karen, Milani, Courtney. Thank you ever so much for being so open and being so willing to share with us. More than ever, being so understanding. And I think we can all relate to a lot of what was shared today. And we just want to thank you for taking the time to be so open and honest with us. And that brings this workshop to an end. And we can continue with coffee maybe. But thank you very much for coming.